Welcome, my children, to Beauties and Beasts, the podcast of all things beautiful and beastly. Listen if you dare. Have I mentioned I love Halloween? As always, there's a number of topics I can cover for this holiday with the Beauty and the Beast theme, from paranormal romance to a classic monster carrying off a human girl movie. The patron vote for this Halloween special was a mix of the two. Interesting thing about paranormal romances is that they often feature a love triangle. For example, Twilight, The Vampire Diaries, usually involving one human girl and one or two male monsters or of some kind. Sometimes at least one of the males is human. But in the case of Tim Burton's 2005 stop-motion film Corpse Bride, the love triangle consists of one male and two female. One female living and one dead. Oddly enough, most fans of this film prefer the dead woman. Question on everyone's minds, is this due to necrophilia? Or just plain sympathy for a wronged, unhappy woman? After all, don't we often end up sympathizing with the character who's been through hell? Literally, in this case? Before we get into this, I'd like to thank my $5 plus patrons, Arvin Joshua Rocks 15, BellaPinkSavage, Cosmic Trail, nalaxsimba, and TyrannosaurusVenom. You too can become a patron today by pledging to patron.podbean.com/beautiesandbeasts. That's patron.podbean.com/beautiesandbeasts, or buy my merchandise on Redbubble at DisneyFanatic23.redbubble.com. Get new spooky apparel and decor in time for Halloween, including LGBTQ-based designs. Redbubble now sells baseball caps, mouse pads, and desk mats. Oh, and masks! Vaccinated or not, we still need masks, people. In other news, also Halloween related, the Haunted MTL has published my short story, The Smile of Helen Donnie, in their LGBTQ horror anthology, Queer as Hell. Now available for sale on Amazon for $18 plus shipping and handling, featuring tons of horror stories with queer themes, characters, and or written by queer authors like myself. Proceeds will go to LGBTQ charities, so you'll be getting spooky stories for Halloween and supporting the queer community. Now, most animation fans familiar with Tim Burton's story of The Corpse Bride most animation fans are familiar with Tim Burton's story of The Corpse Bride, but few know that it was loosely based on a Russian Jewish folktale. I know, right? If you've seen the movie, you'll see that there's nothing Russian or Jewish about it. Spoiler alert, by the way. So, first I will go into the movie's origins. So, the folktale tells of a young Russian man who is about to get married, and he and his best man are on the way to the bride's village, which is a 2-day walk. Yeah, no, this is before they had cars. As they camp for the night, the bridegroom starts to play around by putting his wedding ring on a stick that looks like a bony finger. Then he dances around the ring 3 times, singing the Jewish wedding song and reciting the entire marriage sacrament, and his friend just sits there laughing like, oh, this is totally funny, dude. And then the laughter stops when the ground starts to shake, and from the earth emerges a rotting corpse in a tattered wedding dress and veil. The corpse declares that since the man put the ring on her finger, did the wedding dance, and recited the marriage vows, they are now man and wife. Yeah, not so funny now, eh? You read my mind, Bella. Of course, the groom's having none of that. He and his friend flee to the living bride's village and go to the rabbi and ask, Mr. Rabbi, if someone were to say, put a wedding ring on a bony finger and do the wedding dance and recite the marriage vows, does this count as a real marriage? And the rabbi's like, that's a weird question. Why do you ask? Just curious. I'm asking for a friend. And then, in a great gust of wind, the corpse bride comes in to claim the young man as her husband. The rabbi says, oh shit, you weren't kidding. They didn't teach us this in rabbi school, so I'll have to consult with the other rabbis for a second opinion. So, while the rabbis get into this huge religious debate, the corpse corpse bride impatiently demands that she celebrate her wedding night with her husband. Naturally, the groom's not too keen on this idea because he's not a necrophiliac. At this time, the real human bride comes in wondering what all the commotion is about, and once her fiancé explains the really crazy story, she starts crying that now she will never be married or have a family. You know, there are other guys. The rabbi comes out only to confirm that the ceremony was performed with the basic rites, and then they all come out later to say that, well, the ceremony was proper. The dead have no claim upon the living. The corpse bride howls in despair that this was her last chance at life and that it is all ruined and her dreams will never be fulfilled. The living bride takes pity on her, cradles her, and says, "I will go live your dreams for you, have children for you, enough for the two of us, and you can rest in peace knowing that our children and our children's children will be well cared for." The living bride then takes the corpse to the river, digs a shallow grave, and lays the corpse to rest with her ring and gown, and she looks peaceful and happy in a proper grave. The woman then marries her fiancé, and they tell their children and grandchildren the story of the corpse bride so that she will never be forgotten. A bittersweet ending based on events that were actually true, not the marrying the corpse part, please no. See, in 19th century Russia, anti-Semitism was widespread all across Eastern Europe, and often anti-Semite groups would ambush wedding parties on the road, and because the bride would be the one to bear future generations of Jews, she would be taken from a carriage, murdered, and buried in her wedding gown. Awful, right? So this story, while spooky, pays tribute to those poor brides whose hopes and dreams were shattered and, well, lives literally destroyed, and tells those living brides to keep the dead ones in memory as they live the dreams for them. Pretty cool, huh? It makes us see Tim Burton's film version in a whole new light. So, the movie still takes place in the 19th century, but in England, and the characters are Christian. Well, it takes away the whole anti-Semitist context, but let's see if the general moral is any similar. So, young Victor Van Dort is betrothed to Victoria Everglot. Yes, I know, Victor and Victoria, but hey, I made two characters fall in love whose names were Screwball and Mothball, so I can't exactly fault them for that. Although they have never met before. The Everglots are a noble family, yet are bankrupt, and since the Van Dorts have money, they arrange the marriage between their children. And in return, the fish merchant Van Dorts will be elevated into society. So, this is important for the parents, as most marriages in that time were. They were pretty much business transactions. Not really based on love. On the day of the wedding rehearsal, while parents are taking tea, Victor tinkles with the piano in the front hall. Victoria hears him, comes down, and comes up behind him, startling him. She starts talking of how she dreamed of her wedding day as a child to find someone she was deeply in love with. And while Victor tries to chat her up, he gets really, really nervous because he's a bit of a klutz. And Victoria's mother interrupts on how they shouldn't be alone together. Fornication, you know. Unmarried men and women cannot be alone together. It was a rule, okay? It was a stupid rule, but hey. 3 hours later, the pastor is still trying to walk Victor through the wedding vows, but he keeps botching it up. Meanwhile, a mysterious Lord Barkis Bittern arrives early for the ceremony. No one seems to know who he's related to, which kind of makes what happens later weird. In Victor's fumblings, he ends up dropping the ring and setting Lady Everglot's dress on fire. The pastor stresses that Victor has to be properly prepared and learn his vows. Embarrassed, Victor walks through the woods at night, reciting his vows, and he still messes up. It's not until he thinks of Victoria and how kind she was that he is able to say those iconic lines that have since been used for real wedding vows. And what a terrible time for my microphone to be cracking in my ears. Let me just... There we go. With this hand, I will lift your sorrows. Your cup will never empty, for I will be your wine. With this candle, I will light your way in darkness. With this ring, I ask you to be mine. As he says this, he places the ring on a stick that looks eerily like a finger. Sound familiar? At least this wasn't due to boyish foolishness. You guessed it. Turns out it was an actual hand, and a terrifying but lovely corpse bride emerges from the ground, chases Victor through the woods, and drags him to the land of the dead, which is much more colorful than the land of the living, which is all gray and black and white. I really commend Tim Burton for the irony. Surrounded by skeletons and corpses, Victor demands to know what's going on, and a skeleton named Bone Jangles, get it, sings the tale of the corpse bride, how she was seduced by a handsome but penniless stranger, and when her dad refused the match, for good reason, they made a plan to elope. So, the bride put on her mother's wedding dress, got her family jewels and a satchel of gold as requested by her lover, suspicious, and waits for him under the oak tree in the woods at night. He shows up alright, only to murder her and take the jewels and the gold for himself. So, not a hate crime like in the folktale, but a gold-digging crime is pretty bad too. So, the bride made a vow that she'd wait in the place that she died under the oak tree, waiting for her true love to come set her free. And now Victor has married her and will be by her side forever! Hey, the Jewish wedding at least had a witness. This can't be official. There wasn't even an officiant. How is this legal? But Victor is having none of that and tries to hightail it out of there. Meanwhile, in the world above, Lord Marcus informs the Everglots that Victor was spotted with a mystery woman. The Everglots are furious, but give the Vendors till dawn to find their son. Back in the underworld, Victor tries to get away, but his new wife, Emily, is too fast for him. He attempts to talk with her that, he's sorry for what happened to her and would like to help, but he really needs to get home. She says this is her home. This is his home now. She moves fast, I'm telling you. Emily gives him a wedding present, a skeleton dog. His childhood dog, Scraps. Really interested to know how she knew about this dog when this is their first real conversation. Hey, how did she even know his name? Did he ever give it to her? Plot holes here. As thrilled as Victor is to see Scraps, he still plans to return to the world above, and so spins a story about wanting to introduce Emily to his parents. She's all for the idea, then finds out that they're still alive, and so she takes Victor to see a mystical skeleton named Elder Gutschnicht. He offers them a haunting spell that will allow them to go up to the land of the living, and when they want to go back, they must say hopscotch. Yeah, I know. Victor tells Emily that he must prepare his parents for the big news, and tells her to wait there under the tree until he comes back. Yeah, like she's not gonna get severe PTSD from this. In reality, Victor goes to Victoria's balcony window. She's happy to see him, but then an impatient Emily shows up and she's not happy to see Victoria. Emily says hopscotch and drags Victor back to the underworld and reprimands him for lying to her to see another woman. Victor insists that Emily's the other woman, but Emily's like, no, you're married to me! She's the other woman! Victor says that this can't work out because, well, she's dead and he's alive. She's like, you should have thought about that before you asked me to marry you. Victor goes, don't you understand? It was a mistake. I would never marry you. Ouch. You really could have put that a bit more gently. Like, I had no idea that was actually your hand. I was just practicing my vows. Poor communication here, okay? That's another reason you don't exactly make the best couple. Like, you don't really talk about what's going on here. Yep, that is the real issue. Emily goes to her room in despair, and despite her bug friends comforting her, her unbeating heart is beyond repair. God, I feel so bad for her. You know, she's not a bad person, just she kind of took this whole thing out of hand. Upstairs, in the land of the living, Victoria raves to her mother about how Victor is married to a corpse. Thinking she's gone crazy, her mom locks her in a room. But Victoria, determined to save Victor from this awful fate, climbs out the window and runs to the pastor. I can't believe this girl gets so much hate. She goes from a quiet, submissive mouse to a woman willing to disobey her parents and save her man, rather than sit at home crying about it. She's got guts, let me tell you. Victoria looks to the pastor for help, but he thinks she's speaking in tongues and so takes her back home. Yep. The mom orders that her windows be barred so that she can't escape again. Lord Barkis expresses his deepest sympathies to the parents, and that if he had a woman like Victoria on his arm, he would lavish her with riches. He himself was once betrothed, but lost his bride to tragedy, and now is lonely, and wealth counts for nothing. Suspicious. So, the Everglots tell Victoria that she is to marry Lord Barkis, or else they'll be thrown out into the streets. But Victoria is still in love with Victor, yet since she cannot get to him, she's left with no choice. Back in the underworld, Victor apologizes to Emily via piano solo, and they share a sweet moment. And then an acquaintance of Victor's shows up dead and tells him of Victoria's new engagement. Victor goes off on his own, heartbroken, while Victoria, dead inside, is being married to Lord Barkis up above. In his sulking, Victor overhears Elder Gutnicht tell Emily that the marriage vows are binding only until death do they part. And, well, Emily's already dead. Emily, not wanting Victor to leave, asks if there's something that they can do to fix this. Elder Gutnicht says there's only one way. If Victor chooses to die too, by repeating his vows in the land of the living and taking poison. This will stop his heart forever, and only then will he be free to give it to her. But Emily can't ask him to do that, because, come on, that's messed up. But Victor reveals himself, saying that she doesn't have to ask him. He'll do it. Yeah, there's a lot of things wrong with this that I'll get into later. So, they get all the dead people together for their wedding party. They crash the land of the living, break up Lord Barkis' wedding reception, scare everyone until the living realize that their loved ones had come back from the dead. This isn't a bad thing. A terrified Barkis says that he and Victoria should take her dowry and get out of here. And when Victoria reveals that they haven't got any money, Barkis is enraged. Yeah, next time you set up a honey trap, dude, do research on your mark. What kind of con man slash murderer are you? Oops, I kind of gave something away. Victoria tells Barkis off and storms out, following the death procession to the church, where Victor and Emily are having their wedding. Victor says the vows perfectly without stumbling, and shows how far he's grown, and is prepared to take the poison when Emily sees Victoria in her wedding dress and is reminded of herself. She stops Victor from taking the poison, saying that her dreams were taken from her and now she's stolen them from someone else, that she loves Victor, but he doesn't belong to her. And she allows Victor to be with Victoria. Except Barkis arrives, and oh yeah, he's still Victoria's husband. Right, that technicality. Then Emily recognizes Barkis as her killer! Plot twist! Not really, saw it coming a mile away. Victor stands up to Barkis, taking him on an epic duel between cutlass and fork. And yeah, he seems to fight with the fork pretty well. Just as Barkis is about to stab Victor, Emily steps into the blow and demands that Barkis get out. In his arrogance, Barkis drinks a toast to Emily, always a bridesmaid, never the bride, from the poisoned goblet. That was all on you, dude. this villain isn't very smart. I mean, he didn't even check if the woman he was going to marry for her money even had any money, and he just drank a random drink. For what? Just to mock her? Anyway, now that Barkus is dead, all the other zombies, who love Emily to pieces because she's amazing, are free to torture him in the underworld forever. Don't mess with our girl. Emily, seeing how happy Victor and Victoria are, starts to leave, but Victor says, well, he made a promise. She says, you kept your promise. You set me free, and now I can do the same for you. She gives back the wedding ring, walks down the aisle, throws the bouquet to Victoria, and turns into a kaleidoscope of butterflies, and flies off into the moonlight, finally at peace. God, this movie's beautiful. So, a different take on the folktale, but shares the theme of letting go of the past and honoring the dead, except the movie makes it more personal with the groom forming a relationship with the corpse bride, making the ending when she is laid to rest much more emotional. And, it also ties in together at the beginning when Victor kept a butterfly in a glass jar and was sketching it and then let the butterfly go free, just like he sets Emily free from her past, and Emily sets him free, and she becomes butterflies. Poetic. I know a lot of fans prefer Emily over Victoria, and that really Victor should have been with Emily and not her. But let's be real, the movie would have been ruined if Victor had killed himself to be with Emily. We don't need more bad influences like Romeo and Juliet in the romance department. See, aside from Emily being dead, she also practically forced Victor to join her in the land of the dead, and tried to keep him there with her emotional baggage. That's not healthy. Staying with someone just because you feel sorry for them. And then Victor deciding to settle for Emily just because Victoria was marrying someone else, he's got nothing left to lose. That's not really healthy thinking either. Emily had to overcome her selfish desire, let go of what happened to her, and let her beloved live his life. I mean, you can't ask the one you love to kill themselves. What kind of a message is that to send to kids? But it's not all for naught. Through the experience, Victor learns what it means to be married, that love requires sacrifice, that you have to be willing to fight for your love, but not to the point of self-destruction or obtaining complete control over your partner. Victoria learns this too as she fights to save Victor. There's a fine line between selfishness and selflessness, especially when it comes to love, and I think this movie depicts it well. You have to be selfish when you're in love, because you really want that person for yourself. But you also have to be selfless, and so that your partner can do their own thing, and that your partner's just not being completely controlled by you. But you can't be so selfless that you don't get your love at all. Of course, in Emily's case, she really had to let it go. Yes, we're sad for Emily, but now that she's overcome her trauma and insecurities, she can be at peace, and Victor and Victoria can live her dreams for her, and probably like in the folktale, keep her memory alive in stories that they tell their kids. Sorry, shippers, this is really the best ending you can get from this. Sometimes a bittersweet ending is the best way you can do it. Alright, any questions in the chat? I'm sorry I was a little delayed in starting this. Had a personal health emergency, and let's just leave it at that. Okay, BellaPinkSavage says, what a beautiful poetic mess. Yep, I really think that's the best way to describe it. And honestly, if I were to choose between this and The Nightmare Before Christmas, well, Nightmare Before Christmas is a fun holiday movie. And good in itself, and it's got better songs. But Corpse Bride, I think, in terms of the story, it's a bit more complete. There are a lot. I think there are a lot of holes in Nightmare Before Christmas that are kind of hard to ignore. But yeah, they're both beautiful films nonetheless. Alright, does anybody in the chat have anything left to add? You too can join these live streams and add your 2 cents by becoming a patron today. Just go to patreon.podbean.com/beautiesandbeasts. Okay, so no questions at the moment. So, next Halloween episode, we'll look at something more adult in the slasher film franchise, Child's Play. More specifically, the 4th installment, Bride of Chucky, featuring a monstrous Bonnie and Clyde type couple. Be prepared, this is a weird one. Alright, until next time, check out my Halloween merch and new short story in Queer as Hell. And future brides and grooms out there, understand what true devotion and sacrifice means in marriage, and take care when practicing your wedding vows. That hand-like stick might not be a stick at all.